We are trained that life is always about A versus B, X versus Y, fish or chicken. If we get out of this Cartesian way of thinking of the world and perceiving the world, and we actually think that we can integrate things and we can have fish and chicken at the same time, whether we're at home or in the plane.
Previously on Resilience in Action.
If that company creates a culture in which you ask any of the employees or any of the leaders that are part of that company, why do you exist as an organization conformed by human beings? And the answer is either I don't know or we're here to make money. You won't have a reason to exist. Why do you go to work every day? Why do you spend 10 hours there?
From Prospera Labs, this is Resilience in Action. The story of how to unpack the ultimate superpower when it comes to adapting to a fast-changing environment. The story of how to bounce back stronger and stay away from digging yourself into a deeper hole. A story told from multiple perspectives, one angle at a time and over the course of this season. I am Gabriel Enrique. We are at episode 6. You probably heard episodes 1 to 5 because you received an email from me, or through our website at prosperalabs.org. Or maybe you came across it on social media. But if you haven't, stop. Go back to the beginning. We are telling this story in order. The story of how to unlock the power of resilience. So to pick up where we left off, in the last episode, you heard about the importance of fulfilling your purpose by reframing challenges into opportunities for growth. Those that will define how we live and thrive today and in the future. We learned that it is about moving away from a biased and overly simplistic way of looking at life and business and into a more integrative approach where we consider a larger set of variables as we make decisions. Or, how Danielle brilliantly put it in the previous episode, it is about moving away from fish versus chicken and into fish plus chicken and even lamb. We learned that life is about daily choices. We can make the right choices in terms of how we invest our time, energy, and attention. And that is how we move into resilience in action. By the end of this episode, you will have a better sense of how to use resilience in action. And by resilience in action this time, I mean from the perspective of public innovation. In this episode, we will take a look at resilience in action when it comes to redesigning the way we look at politics and the intersection with mainstream media. Carole Taylor's professional career has moved from public affairs broadcasting to politics, to business, and back again. Throughout these transitions, one thing remains constant: a desire to contribute. Whether it was reporting from Chile during the revolution or from Honduras in the midst of devastating flood, Carole's concern for journalistic integrity was obvious. Covering the Yom Kippur War in Israel for W5 was a life-changing experience. Politics had always been a strong interest for Carole, who was often called upon to conduct television year-end interviews with the Prime Minister. In 1986, Carole herself decided to enter the political world. She ran and was elected as an independent alderman for Vancouver City Council. Topping the polls in her second election, Carole was named chair of the Greater Vancouver Hospital District, affording her the opportunity to work on the inside of the local healthcare system. As chair of the Vancouver Board of Trade, Carole headed the Spirit of Vancouver Task Force in a citywide effort to revitalize the partnership between business and the Vancouver community. The spring of 2005 saw a return to politics for Carole as she ran for the provincial government in British Columbia. She was subsequently named Minister of Finance by Premier Gordon Campbell in June 2005. As Finance Minister, Carole oversaw the modeling and implementation of a comprehensive and groundbreaking carbon tax for the province of British Columbia. Currently, she is the Canada Chair of the Trilateral Commission and Chancellor Emeritus at the University of Victoria. Let's hear what she has to say.
Resilience is a very, very tricky, complicated issue in real life. And I've found that in my personal life, there have been times that you don't sit down and say, gosh, I'd like to be resilient. But the actions you take, when you look back, you can see that it was. I started off, of course, I was in journalism for a lot of years, but then decided to go into politics. And that was a tough decision because, you know, in a sense, it was going over to the dark side. But I believed that, you know, I kept asking other people, why don't you run? And I felt, you know, at some point you look in the mirror and you have to say, well, I believe in public service, so I'll have to do it. But my first foray wasn't that great because it was into municipal politics. And I was asked to run by one of the parties and gave it a lot of thought and finally decided to do it. But when it came to the nomination, in Vancouver, all the councillors are voted at large. And so it comes off slates of parties, like in the States would be Republican, Democrat, whatever. But people go on a slate of candidates. And I didn't make the nomination for the slate, which was a shock because, you know, I had put work into it and thought about it. Well, what turned out to happen was a traditional old political tricks. Some individual decided that he wanted to get the nomination. And so he bussed in before the actual meeting started, busloads of people. And he told them on the ballot, you had to vote for 10 people. You had a choice of maybe 20. And so to make it simple, he said, just vote for the top 10. So they all came in, they got off the bus, they marked the top 10. So it was, of course, an alphabetical list. And Taylor was way down at the bottom, so I didn't make the list. And so, and they'd done it before the meeting even was called to order. So it was all illegitimate. It was all wrong. And of course, I stood up and I said, well, this isn't the proper way to pick our political leaders. And, you know, the folks that ran the party just weren't going to stand up and say that. And I was quite shocked, actually. So that's when you get a failure or you're knocked down, and what is your response? And so the powers that be kept saying, oh, you know, Carole, you know, this is just politics. This is what happens. You know, kind of be a good girl, go away. And I thought, well, you know, really, the only reason I even thought about going into politics was to do things differently. And this is wrong. And so rather than go away quietly, I stood up and I said, this is illegitimate. It's incorrect. It's the way politics used to be done. Anyway, long story. Of course, the party would have nothing to do with me at this point because they were embarrassed. And so I decided to run as an independent. No independent, all by herself, not on a slate, had ever won. So I wasn't expecting to win. But I thought, I've got to stand up for what I believe in. And so it wasn't easy and got lots of blowback from people thinking, oh, she doesn't know how to play the game. But did it because I felt it was right. And of all the surprises, I actually won. And so what started out as being maybe the worst day of my life ended up being the best experience of my life because in being resilient, you have to dig down really deep. And you find out who you are and what your real values are. And if they're solid, then you go forward. And I ended up being an independent politician, so I didn't have to pay any attention to other people telling me what to do. I could just, you know, look at an issue, study it, come to my conclusion, and say what I believed. So I didn't have to toe any party lines and went on to have pretty good political life. But it started out with a real failure. So resiliency for me, I see it very personally. It is the ability to pick yourself up and go forward.
I really appreciate you sharing this story with us because there's a lot of misunderstanding on bouncing back. How does that really look like? And I think your story really describes a very beautiful case of something that we're all going through right now, which is sometimes we want to bounce back, but do we really want to bounce back to the same place that we were? Right. I don't know if you can walk us through your I guess both rational, but a lot of, as you mentioned, inner work in terms of figuring out what's the best way for you. It turned out to be amazing, but in the midst of it, it wasn't super clear. And it wasn't really just going back to the party and trying to be back on the list.
Right. And
how was it for you?
it was extremely difficult in the middle of it because everyone was telling me, you can't do it, you shouldn't do it, you don't understand, all of the way politics is, unfortunately, too often done. They don't like it when there's a disruptor who comes along. And so I was certainly a disruptor. And I just couldn't leave it be and walk away from it and say that the bad guys won again. Because I do believe in public policy. I do believe in government. And so we've got to get good people into government. And if the good people gets discouraged by these little games that they were all playing, then we'll never change government. And so it just came back to going deep inside myself and saying, well, why did you want to do it in the first place? And what are your values? And even if it's tough, stand up. So I stood up.
How, along your way, because I'm sure when you didn't know whether you were going to be successful or not, it was scary.
No.
How did you start to notice, and I think it's very relevant for these days, how did you start to notice that even though you were going, I guess, off-road for the traditional mindset, what were the signs that you were on the right path?
Well, I was astounded at the reaction I got from the public, because the public could see that this was wrong. And they knew that behind the political curtains, things went on. And I was not the first, but I was openly taking the curtains apart and saying, this is what happened. This is wrong, and we should change it. And I was just flooded with people, volunteers who wanted to help with the campaign, who didn't know me until then, people writing articles saying this is terrible. So the reaction from the community was just enormous. The reaction from the political players was negative over here, but from the broad community, it was wonderful. And as I said, I didn't do it because I thought I could win, because no one had. I did it because I felt I would rather go down fighting and saying what I believe in. And people in the community could believe that was true. And so I touched something. And I had people, I didn't have any money for a campaign. And so all the other parties had their big signs up on everybody's lawns and whatnot. And I didn't have that, right? But people started making signs, individual signs. I can remember a heart, just with my name. And across the city, these signs would just start appearing. So it was, we didn't have social media at that time, but it was what social media in an extent can do these days, where the message spreads. And all of a sudden, people are responding individually to what they think is right. And so it happened in that way. And somehow I won.
That's
so unbelievable.
How important it is to let go of outcomes and just go for it and hope for the best. Sometimes we're just so attached to the tragedy or that it's not possible.
And people in business, of course, I don't know a successful person who hasn't had a major failure. I mean, I just don't know a successful person like that. And so the ones that, find a way to, maybe it isn't in the same business, but to, really think about what they'd like to do and what did I learn from that experience and how can I apply it and how do I move forward, are the big stories of success. I talk to university students a lot because I've been chancellor of 2 different universities. And, I find that there's a bit of a rigidity often. They are so programmed to, I will take this degree and then I will study and get this postgrad and then I will get this job and I will maybe do something or other, but I will get this promotion. It's sort of linear. And I keep talking to them about the necessity of taking risks. If you don't open yourself up to failure, which is what risk-taking is, you have to be willing to fail before you actually see those very special opportunities to do something spectacular. And so I'm always talking about risk-taking and don't be afraid to fail and how you pick yourself up and how you learn from it and how do you go forward. And I think it's pretty scary, especially for very young people. It's scary for older people too, but
it's hard. It's very little spoken about the hardship and the inner emotional work it takes to just get over yourself, I guess. Are there any other inspiring examples that you'd like to share that about resilience that you've seen these days that says, oh wow, that reminds you of how courageous we can be?
Well, if you had asked me in January, I would not have believed that you could close down the global economy, period. Not possible. I mean, it was not anywhere in my thinking or research or ideas that this could happen. So the fact that it happened and the fact that people all over the world all of a sudden pulled back and their government said lockdown and people locked down and followed all these rules, stopped work, businesses closed. I never would have believed that could happen. And the fact that the resiliency of our family supports, our business supports, the fact that we did it and we're now trying to find our way out of it is the grandest example of resiliency I've ever seen. I know when it first happened and they said, oh, everybody's going to have to stay at home for 2 weeks. I thought, okay, I can do 2 weeks. And then, of course, 2 weeks, another month. And I went, are you kidding me? And then now we're almost, 4 months? That's the other thing I think about resiliency, is that you don't know how things play out. So when you first are into that failure or the first crisis, you respond and you have to have your mechanisms for how you as an individual gets stronger and responds. And you just keep playing it until it plays out. And we still don't know the ending to this one. I know that just in our province in British Columbia, by the end of December, the estimates are that there will be about 30,000 businesses that never open again. And I think 30,000 businesses, all those families that ran businesses, the employees that were part of it, the people that paid the rent because of that or got their kids to university, 30,000 just in our one province that's gone. So the resiliency, both for the economy as a whole, like how does it survive this, but also for all those individuals who are going to have to find a way forward. This is just an extraordinary sociological experiment. So I'm in awe that we have followed the rules to the extent that we have, that we've managed to, in many ways, ease the crisis so that hospitals are coping, at least at this point. And we'll see how this plays out and how soon vaccines come. But we're in the middle of this grand experiment.
We've gotten to see a very wide variety of responses, especially in, both political and business leaders. In my view, I think Canada is very fortunate to have the leadership that you have, at least from the Seattle side, it looks that way. What do you think is preventing most leaders from staying resilient and responding in flexible ways and being open to adjusting?
Well, we're seeing a lot of the true characters behind the political faces. And, this is an amazing situation where no one does know the answer. And so mistakes will be made along the way. As Governor Cuomo, for instance, who's becoming a bit of a hero the way he's handled this, but he made the mistake, or his government made the mistake in the early days of sending some of the old folks with COVID who are coming out of the hospital back into the long-term care facilities that really accentuated that. And so no one knew, right? And so you do make mistakes, and you've got to, as quickly as you can, repair that damage and keep going forward. And so a lot of our politicians, I would say, are just probably in shell shock. because they haven't got a plan for this. No one where's my briefing notes? You know, I know what I'm supposed to say on that topic, but what do we do here? How do we make it up as we go along? And so the politicians who are having some success are, first of all, being transparent. They're really saying, this is the problem, and we don't know the answer. So come with me on this journey, and we'll try to figure it out. And so the more open they are, the more the public believes they're getting the real facts, the more chance there is of it, you know, working out well. So in Canada, like in every country, we've got some politicians who are doing it really well and some who aren't doing it so well. But I would think that's the characteristic that I look for, is the individuals who are just putting it all out there and sharing it with the public and admitting they don't have all the answers and saying, okay, this is what we're going to try, so let's see if this works.
Going into the mythical aspect of resilience, because from seeing the inspiring cases, being transparent and open and keep open communication seems like so straightforward, could seem so straightforward, and yet not everybody is following their leads. What do you think are the myths around resilience?
Well, I think that if we're talking about how governments handle it, we come back to my bugbear, which is I really think we've got to get better people into government. And yes, we've got some good people, so I don't want to disparage everyone. But we do have to have people who are going into government for the right reasons. They're not going it for their own ego. They're not doing it so that they can stand up on the stage and have everybody applaud. They're going because they really want to make some policy changes, or they have some values that they would like to talk about and share. And so I think that's what I'm seeing most in this current situation, is that we need more folks like you. We need more folks like all of your contacts who are willing to actually take the risk of going into political life and trying to make a difference. But whenever I talk to groups of young students, I always say is, you know, who's interested in politics, in being a politician or being in public service? I almost never get a hand go up. You know, once in a while, just once in a while. And so then I talk about why I do believe you can be an agitator, you can be a disruptor, you can actually make a difference. And I try to give them examples from my days in municipal politics and my days as a provincial finance minister, where, you know, you actually accomplish something to try and get their belief back, because so many young people are just so cynical about politics. But if we abandon the field, guess whom we're abandoning it to? And it's not the ones you want making decisions. Someone says, oh, you have to have such a thick skin to be a politician. I say, I don't want someone with a thick skin making my decisions. I want someone who cares about homelessness or cares about mental health issues or, you know, the big public policy issues. But you guys have got to be the answer. And yet I'm not finding enough folks that really want to step into it and take a chance.
So let me be super frank with you, Carole. Okay. We don't seem to understand what's going on. I think the fact that you were able to see the little tricks was critical for you to figure out a way to turn it around. For me, at least, it's like, I see the president of this country. I don't understand what he's thinking. And I guess that draws us, you know, further away, because we love public policy. We love getting down to the issues and figuring out ways to solve things. But we just don't understand how does the mythical aspect of it, the ego part of it, keeping a straight face. I mean, you've been there, you've seen them close enough. Just enlighten us. How does it work for the stigma most of us have?
And so you've hit it exactly, that you have to understand something about how the system works. And so what I say to the university students I talk to is that we all have some issue that really drives us crazy or that we have some thoughts about. And the best possible way is to identify something you're passionate about. And if it's at the local level, or even if it's at the statewide or broader level, find what party or what system is talking about these issues. If you start to do research on all the people who are running an election, you'll find someone that you think, oh, I kind of like their ideas. Try to get involved with their campaign or watch closely or offer ideas, but work your way into the system so that you can understand it better. And you can also see ways that you can present yourself to run, because you don't start off by saying, hey, I want to run. You have to, have worked on an issue or have some reason for being there, not just for the glory. So, work in, but there are people, if you look around closely enough, you'll find people that you think, oh, I kind of like that person. Like for me, I watch Pete Buttigieg, someone I'd never heard of before, but I watched him closely. Here's my addiction, but I watch every political debate. I watch, all the news, all of the different stations, all the points of view. Anyway, this guy all of a sudden surfaces. And I started to listen to everything he was doing and saying. And I thought, I really, really like this guy. But that's an example. If you find someone and you start to listen to them, watch them, and if you were anywhere in the States, you could find one of his groups that you could attach yourself to and just start to work to support a good person. And, who knows where the path leads you. But, you have to, it takes work. No one's, well, someone will, but usually people don't come and tap you on the shoulder and say, oh, you're perfect. Come and run for us. And in fact, I think they often ask the wrong people, especially with women, because I keep trying to get multicultural groups and women more into the system. But with women, they'll go to some really smart young lawyer. And, she's got some profile and they think she'd be fabulous. We could get her elected, right? Well, she's probably, first of all, just working so hard to have become good at her job at a fairly young age. She very likely is into a family situation, maybe just starting a family, maybe has kids, maybe thinking about it, certainly trying to keep the husband and the work and everything in the air and working. They come to that person and say, we want you. They don't go to the 40-year-old woman who perhaps has had other different careers along the way, and maybe her kids are more settled now and has all this energy and enthusiasm to go out and do something. They never ever would ask that person to run. That person has to initiate it herself and push. So the system itself goes out and they try to pick stars and pick them at a time that's often a very tricky time in their lives.
They do it, yeah. And how about the media, for instance? I really love that you have this very deep experience in journalism. How does it work there?
In terms of how they cover politics, or how does getting ahead in media?
No, I would say the stories that are told that are very relevant. Again, more going into the substance, who gets to tell which story. I think we're seeing a lot of initiatives like this one, that we're just doing our own thing, building our own communities. And maybe it's because I guess we didn't find the space to do it, from the inside of the system. I'd love to hear your views in terms of, is it relevant to try to just be part of that system and tell different stories from that platform, or we can just go our independent way?
Well, so I'm pretty depressed about the traditional media these days. I mean, it's not the media that I grew up in. I mean, when I was a young reporter, an issue came to you and you talked to everybody you could on all sides of the issue to try and figure out, understand the issue and then how to go forward and perhaps make suggestions, whatever. The media has disintegrated into these commentators. I mean, it's great to have some commentary. Just put the label on, tell me you're a commentator and I'll decide what I think. But where are our straight reporters? I really find it hard to find straight reporting anymore. And so the only way I can do it, for instance, let's just take with America. I look at all of the American news channels because they've all become so into their own stream, their own lane, that you'll only get this point of view from Fox, this point of view from MSNBC, this point of view from NBC. And so no one's telling the whole story. And so I'm back to being a journalist and doing my own research. So I watch them all and read everything I can, and then I patch it together so that I can figure out what I think is going on. And the problem with, especially I think with the President Trump, it's sort of given blessing to anyone to go after him and to always be telling their opinions or shaping their stories to look negative towards Trump. And so what that has done is a whole generation of young reporters think that that's the way you do reporting. So let's assume it's not Trump next, it's somebody else. You're not going to put that genie back in the bottle. They're too used to telling you what they think. They're too used to saying, oh, well, I think this should be happening or that should be happening. So I don't know how you get back to genuine journalism again. And so, therefore, I think what you're doing and through social media is where it's got to start happening. Because the traditional ones, they're so locked into these patterns now. And so in social media, it's got problems too, of course, but it has the opportunity of being more democratic, of having everybody's points of view and counterpoints of view, and this one arguing with this one arguing. But traditional media, I'm really discouraged. I go back a long ways, and so I can remember with Watergate, and that was the first time I saw journalism change. So up until that time, people really were, doing their stories and trying to do it straight. Watergate, all of a sudden, the reporters thought, oh, I can be the star. Like, I can be the face out there. And every politician's bad. I've just got to figure out how. And that changed the newsroom so completely that, they were always, in the past, if someone, say, well, maybe they had an affair or maybe they liked to have a drink at night or whatever, if it wasn't affecting the job, it just wasn't covered. But once Watergate, and since that we've got all kinds of sequences, everything is out there and everything's fair game, whether or not you're doing a good job. I mean, that becomes almost a side story.
Oh, wow.
And so I watched in our last federal election in Canada, I was so discouraged. So we've got three main parties. So Conservative, Liberals, supposedly in the middle, but they've gone quite left, and then the very left. And they all set up war rooms. And what the war rooms were doing during the campaign was not jumping on issues. And I mean, they were bright young people. They weren't sitting there saying, hey, what's a great public policy on housing that we could get out there and present? No, what they were doing is looking at everybody else's candidates. They were going back 20 years on their social media and their school books and like everything, looking for some misstep along the way. And when they found that misstep, they went straight to the press, and the press played the game, and it was on the front page of the paper. And the only point in their doing this is to destroy somebody's life. That's the only point in doing it. It's to destroy their life, to get them out of the election, and my candidate wins. And all the parties were doing it. It just makes me sick, because I don't know anyone who's perfect. I don't know, maybe you do, but I don't know. And so, I think we're in some really rocky territory here.
So I guess to summarize your view on the mythical aspect of resilience, I don't know if this is the right word, and I'd love to get your views. It's like this very sort of macho perspective in terms of we sometimes think that we'll get to be resilient by punching somebody else and by focusing on how the other person is wrong and make them weak, rather than really building ourselves and being more connected to who we're supposed to serve, even if that's in business or in politics.
Yes, and so the way I coped in politics, because I wasn't someone who was going to punch back and didn't like all of the nastiness, but I had, first of all, don't go into politics unless you really have something you want to accomplish. So I had ideas about what I wanted to do. But in Canada, we're in the British system. So we have what's called not just parliament, but question period. And so every day there's an hour where the opposition can ask questions of the ministers. And it's just a joke, because all they do is they say something absolutely horrible and rude about you and attack you and whatnot. And then that person punches back and says something terrible. I mean, it's just a gong show. It's terrible. And so I got some really good advice from a former politician when I went in. I thought, like, what am I going to do in that atmosphere? And he said, listen to the question. Somewhere amidst all of the abuse, there will be something, like maybe it's housing, or maybe they'll try to connect all of their abuse to some topic. So look for that seed, and whatever the topic is, ignore everything else they said, and just start to talk about what you're doing on housing and what you're trying to do and what's working or what's not working, and And so that's what I would do. And they would come at me blasting, and I would hear just some topic that I could then give my pitch. And so, of course, I was the most boring politician ever. The reporters would go, oh my God, here she goes again, and the opposition. But I'll tell you one funny conclusion. So I was finance minister, and I was the finance minister that brought in our big green budget, and it was in 2008.
Very early on, though. Very, very early on. We're mostly, ahead many years.
Yes, and so with my staff, we designed the first carbon tax, thorough carbon tax, not just on gas, but on everything, carbon tax. And that took, someday I'll tell you the whole story, but that took a full year to design that and get that done and get it passed. Anyway, so I bring in the budget. So it's a controversial budget, right? And it's got a carbon tax. And the very left wing of the party, who should have been very pro the carbon tax, well, they thought they'll win the election by saying, axe the tax. And so that was their whole theme, axe the tax. But anyway, so I present the budget. And when a finance minister does it, it's about an hour speech, you present it. And then the next day, you're there for question period. And they go after every detail in the budget. And so you just have to know it cold. I never got one question on the budget. And some of the reporters that, of course, I know well just because I've worked with them forever said, Carole, I've never seen that in the history of question period, that after a finance minister presents the budget, there wasn't one question on the budget, because they knew what I would do. I would use that as a chance to talk about the carbon tax and to talk about green this and green that. And they didn't want to give me the platform. So I got no questions.
Wow.
Perfect.
Wow. How, going back to your specific career and path, you just mentioned that if you want to go into service, you really need to have a very clear goal of what is it that you want to accomplish. I'd like to learn a little bit more of I don't know if the carbon tax was part of the things that you wanted to accomplish, or you figure out along the way. But in particular, I'd love to know what's the role of purpose when it comes to staying resilient.
Well, and I think it's essential. I don't know how you pick yourself and move on and up if you don't have something down there in the core of your values that says, well, that's what's important, and so how do I apply it going forward? Your passion doesn't have to be a specific thing. For me, a lot of it was just believing that you should have better people in government, so that whatever decision came along, you'd have better people making those decisions for the community and for you. And so who could have predicted COVID? Of course, no one. But if your concentration has been putting people of value and integrity into government, then you can relax somewhat, that they will do their best to try and work this through. And so I guess that's the goal for me with resiliency, is if those values are strong and good, then whatever comes at you. I look at, here's a situation. So look at all of our airports, for instance, and what COVID's done to travel and airports. So a very successful airport runner, chairman, president, whatever, they've been going for the last number of years, and it's been a certain model of expansion and increased flights and increased this and increased security and increased retail. And, so they've had their model, hugely successful, financially successful. Boom. So I was thinking, if you're sitting there as CEO, you have got to you're down on the floor. How are you going to pick yourself up and not get back to the old model? The old model is not going to work. So resiliency doesn't, as you mentioned earlier, it doesn't mean just returning to what you did before. It's okay. All of that experience I've had, this has come at, how do we shape this going forward? Will our airports now be smaller rather than bigger? Will we have probably fewer flights? How do we handle, we know how it changed for handling security. How do we handle health issues? Because this is not going to be the last virus. And, so it's just an interesting business case, isn't it? To say, wouldn't that be interesting to sit and try and figure that out? And that applies to almost every business you can look at, whether it's the restaurants, whatever it is. And so the challenge will be there for anyone who is working hard and building success when something like this comes along to say, oh, okay, now what? Now, how do we do it? And I think that people sort of think resiliency is easy. It's certainly easy to say. So you get hit down, you pick yourself up, and off you go. It's sort of an academic answer, but it's not easy to do. It is not easy. And I think that's one of the myths about resiliency. Oh, it's something you just do it, right? You should do it, so you do it. No, it's really, really hard.
I'm really glad you mentioned the airport case, because talk about not straightforward solutions.
No, what are you going to do? And I think I've always loved problem solving. I think that's why I was in journalism for so long. I loved looking at these issues and thinking, what is the answer? I'll talk to this person, talk to that expert, and then try to figure out how to solve the problem. And so I took those same techniques into politics. Yeah, talk to this person, that person, try to figure it out and solve the problem.
And yet, Carole, if I can be quite frank, from following your career, I really admire that there has been a very clear motivation or intention. Somewhere you mentioned, I've led my life motivated by contribution. Right. So it seems to be a little bit more complex. While we figure things out, you've allowed yourself to be very focused on how to contribute. How did that work out for you?
It's sort of simple in a way. Like, how do you make the world better? That's all. Simple question, right? How do you make the world better? And so I guess it comes to a great extent in how you're brought up. I was lucky to have a great family and, believed in service, in that, my mother would drive cancer patients to appointments and my father would deliver Meals on Wheels. And it was just, the example was always there. You never thought about it, right? How can you help? Who needs help? What can you do? How do you shape it? And so, people come at this from all kinds of backgrounds. I was lucky that was my background. But if inside you want to make things better, there are all kinds of ways you can do it. You can do it through business. You can certainly do it in politics. You can do it through media. But it has to be that feeling that you want to make things better.
And how did you keep yourself so honest and accountable to yourself, like really pushing through great difficulties? I would love to hear one day the story of the carbon tax, because
it was complicated.
It's not everyone can, cruise through that.
And it's not as if you do it easily. You do it with all of the uncertainty and the nerves and the, am I right? Am I wrong? Is this the right path forward? And so I guess that's what I try to say to young people is, don't think any of this is simple or easy, because then you will take the easy path, the comfortable path. I could have taken a really comfortable path.
How come you didn't?
I don't know.
We love what's easy, was fast, was, like comfortable.
I know. And I said once, I was speaking to a big group of students and in a lecture hall, and I said something about, well, I don't see myself as a risk taker. And one of the students said, like, are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? I mean, you started as a teenage television star, and then you go covering wars like the Yom Kippur War, and then you're, head of public broadcasting or the port, or you're in politics or in this and that. And it put me back on my heels a bit, because I don't think I'm a risk.
Oh, really? You don't?
And so I said, well, you know what it is that, first of all, I'm open to all ideas. Yeah. Rather than thinking, oh, this is what I'm going to do with my life, I'm going to be a lawyer and here I go. I've always been sort of searching for something that really would turn me on, excite me. And so I've been open to listening. But then when something risky comes along, I do the very simple thing. Do my list. These are the positives. These are the negatives. These are the possible outcomes on either side. And just sort of worry it through, think it through, wrestle it through, research it through. And then once I've made a decision, getting to the decision is the hard one. Once I've made the decision, then it's all systems go. But that's why I didn't see it as, like, I don't jump off and do something without really thinking it through.
So could we say that your method to explore possibilities it's really like looking at from different angles?
Absolutely.
And you really feel comfortable sitting through the pain of not knowing.
Right. And that's not easy. And so sleepless nights, yes, I've got lots of sleepless nights where I'm, again, thinking through, what if you do this? What if you do that? But that's what makes life interesting. I've often said that my best jobs that I've taken were when I knew half of the job cold, just knew it, and the other half I didn't have a clue. Because then all systems are engaged. You really are challenged, you're thinking, but you've got some comfort base. For instance, when I became chair of the Port of Vancouver, well, I knew a lot about the port by being a councillor member, because I was always dealing with the interaction between the community and the port and the trucks and the grain and, all of the issues. So I knew that part. I knew about community engagement. I didn't have a clue about working with the Teamsters. I didn't have a clue about Asian trade. And so I had half and half. And it was great because the learning is so fabulous. I guess that's what's always pushing me. I'm always pushing to learn something new. And I do feel that when I've been in a job long enough that I could do it in my sleep, it's time to move on.
Is there anything that's keeping you up at night now?
Yeah. I'm
like in terms of like really figuring things out.
I'm still very involved in public policy, so I'm working on a task force on taxation and regulation post-COVID. So it's for advice to give government in terms of what will help businesses get going again. And I started off, there's a small group of us, but I started off by saying I think we also have a list of what not to do for government, because the temptation is going to be they've all got these huge deficits. So the first thing we'll do is we'll tax the rich, we'll tax businesses, we'll increase our revenue, and that'll just destroy businesses, because businesses are just so fragile right now, not paying rent, deferring this cost, deferring that cost. And so the first don't I have for government is don't raise taxes on personal or businesses as your first response to all of this. Everybody's just trying to get on their feet again. There are other things you can do and other ways you can start to work at your revenue issues. But I've said to the Premier, I've said to others, your revenue is so dependent on a good economy. And the good economy means successful businesses, and it means people with good jobs. And so that's got to be your impetus. So that I'm awake at night thinking, what about if we tried this, or could you do that? And so it's usually about public policy.
That's beautiful. You really need to allow businesses to breathe.
Yes.
Have room. Otherwise, your own taxation or the systems will kill them. And then where's the revenue?
And that's the other problem we have, is we have very few business people in government, at least in Canada. And therefore, there isn't someone sitting there who knows what it's like to meet a payroll, or who says, oh my gosh, the landlord's increased the rent on my business and my margin is like 1%. Restaurants, it's like 5%. How can I do this? And all these families depend on me. And how can I pay my mortgage and get my kids to university? So if you don't have people with that in their gut and understand it, they can be making decisions that they don't know what the real effect is in the real world. Don't go to your old patterns. And so that is a problem in two ways, but for people's age. So if you're older and you've got a ton of experience, then technically you've been through changes and ups and downs, and you should be ready to do another one. But often at a certain point, you can become too rigid in, well, this is the way it's always been and this is the way it's going to be. Not these days. Everything is disruptive. And so that can be a disadvantage or an advantage, depending on whether that leader takes all that flexibility that they've learned and applies that. But for young people, it's the same kind of advantage, disadvantage. Haven't had a lot of experience when everything blows up and how do you put it back together again. And so that's a disadvantage. The advantage is you're not locked into any patterns. So you can be flexible. So I think we've got to try to bring out the best of both the older leaders and the young ones and sort of get that mix going. But this world is not going to ever be the same again. It's just, nothing is going to be the same. One of the simple ones that I've got to do not do is when I get asked to do all kinds of different things because of my mixed background, and you want to help. There's my help again, right? So you tend to say yes all the time, yes. And you can't do everything. And so one rule I've made up in the last 10 years, I would say with politics especially, is I never give an answer right away. Never give an answer right away. Say, thank you. I've really got to think about this. Take your time overnight, do the wake in the middle of the night, think about it. Does this fit? Does this work? Can I add value? Like, why am I doing it? Am I doing it just to be on stage, or can I actually help? So I never say yes right away. So that's one. I've started making a list of do not do events, which sounds pretty harsh, but you go to so many things and you've only got a limited amount of time. And some you go to and you think, that was so inspiring, or gosh, I learned something. And so I put, next time they call, for sure, I'm going to do that one. And then you go to another and it's just same old platitudes and everybody's asleep in their chair. I'm like, I'm not going to do that one again. So I'm getting this list of what you can do with your time or not, because your time is so precious, and especially a complicated life like me, because I'm a vice chair of an arts organization. I'm the Canada chair with the Trilateral. I'm in public policy on something else. I'm on one of our educational institutions. I'm on their capital campaign. So I've got all these pieces, right? And so you have to be really organized and be able to say no, which is hard. I've looked at the pandemic, for instance, to see how I responded just personally. And I had a little bit of a practice because I broke my ankle 3 years ago. And not just a little break. I did it dislocated, broken both sides, cast, surgery, cast, pins, plates, everything. But the point was I had to be 6 weeks without putting any weight at all. For someone like me who's traveling all the time, it was such an exercise in how do you mentally survive this. And I found I had to have a system, and I had to be so organized. And I do this first thing in the morning, I do that. And so all of that came into play with COVID. All of a sudden I thought, okay, I'm in my apartment. I'm not in a huge house with a backyard, right? And I'm going to be here for some time. And so I have a rigid schedule. You know, I start first thing in the morning with all my newspapers, all my journalism and everything. Exercise, cardio, and all of that. At a certain time of the day, I do all my emails. Certain time of the day, I do my public policy. Then I do more exercise. Anyway, the whole notion of a structure and a system is the way that I've gotten through this. Actually, I feel quite good about how I've survived this. It wasn't fun, but it was a way of, again, saying, okay, what's important? All of my relationships, business and personal, are important. So you feed them in a different way through 3 and 4 Zoom meetings a day. But however you do it, you've got to keep all of that in place and your family at the top of the pyramid and just be organized.
So this is what I'm starting to get from these conversations. It seems that developing a resilience muscle requires active reframing, refocusing, and reorienting. It also seems that being resilient and staying resilient goes way beyond the individual sphere. Resilience is a superpower when it comes to public innovation. What I appreciate the most about this conversation with Carole is her call to engage actively in public affairs, especially these days where polarization is a big threat to all of us. Here are 3 strategies she invites us to implement. 1. Learn to say no. Be difficult to deal with when it matters. 2. Use absolutely all the resources you have at your disposal. You never know when tides will turn and things will just work out your way. 3. Before you say yes to a new engagement, take your time. You will soon realize there are many conferences and networking events you really don't need to attend. Now, there is a small challenge to these guidelines. Like any other good things in life, you actually have to do them for them to work and benefit your life. And that can be tough in reality. Not because it takes time, but because doing it well involves taking a hard look at yourself and your circumstances. But there is hope for all of us. Here is one easy first step for you. We are facilitating a new kind of program, Purpose in Action, which is like putting your own oxygen masks and getting a precise compass to move forward. This free program will provide a surge of energy and clarity to lead through a tumultuous season. It is designed to help leaders refocus, reorient, reconnect, build inner resilience and purpose for the challenging days yet to come. You will have the opportunity to build fellowships with other leaders doing their best to meet this moment with strength, grace, and authenticity. You will leave with a greater sense of awareness of the personal habits and strategies to be the leader you want to be. Learn more at prosperalabs.org/purposeinaction. Coming up next on Resilience in Action. This crisis has shattered all the assumptions of how this world works and how interconnected we really are. We need to think of today as a precious precursor of what the future will look like for us. In order to become more resilient and move into the right action, we need to become comfortable shifting and getting precise. Shifting from the old, the toxic, the predatory, and into the nourishing, the uplifting, the renewable, the sustainable. That just makes sense today, and especially as we build a new version of the future. We cannot move forward if we are spending part of our time putting down fires, or even worse, actively creating new fires. It seems to me that these leaders have stumbled upon a source of energy to pick ourselves up when we fall. Especially these days, that seems to be quite an important skill for all of us. And for that, I'm really appreciative of these conversations. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling like the more I learn about the nuances of resilience, the more questions I have. Here is a question for you. When we manage to get back up, do we get back up to the same old place or to a new place? I must say this flat out. I do find these approaches to resilience intriguing. I do find these leaders are onto something. Let's see if we can narrow down what that is, and most importantly, what that looks like. We have work to do, and we stand here shoulder to shoulder, me and you, and all the others that are fighting the forces of evil. The day-to-day is hard, no doubt about it, but we do have a compass, a blueprint, and a North Star. It's go time for all of us. Resilience in Action is produced by Paulina Ramos, Julie Chavez, and me. Emily Cohen is our production and operations manager. Maureen Villaseñor is our editorial advisor. Editing help from Nancy Fuentes. Fact-checking by Karina Fregoso. Our theme music is composed by Nick Sandler. Scoring music by Nick and by Mark Villanueva, who also mixed our programs. Our website, where you can listen to all our episodes of this season, ask questions, and sign up to get updates from our work, prosperalabs.org. Resilience in Action is a production of Prospera Labs, accelerating leadership across the globe. Thanks for listening. Until next time.